From the European Parliament here in Brussels, this is Raw Politics. Thank you for joining us tonight, and this is what we have for you on the menu. Bavaria crossroads, the stakes for Germany's far right, and Angela Merkel ahead of a key vote this weekend. Weber's view. Manfred Weber talks to us about the German election and his ambitions to lead the European Commission. Demanding answers, leaders put the pressure on Saudi Arabia over a missing journalist and dissident. Doubling down, Poland defies EU warnings and appoint 27 new judges. And falling for Frankfurt, the new campaign fighting stereotypes to post-Brexit business. Well, it's time to meet our panel for tonight. I'm joined, of course, by Darren McCaffrey, our political editor here at Euronews. Darren, which of these stories are you watching closely?
I think it has to be this video, and we will see it later on from Frankfurt, that is trying to attract business talent, particularly post-Brexit. It's trying to portray itself as not being very German, but in the most German of ways.
Really? All right, looking forward to seeing that. And we're also joined by Valentina Pop. She's Brussels correspondent for the Wall Street Journal. Valentina, which of these stories do you like?
I think the importance of the fate of journalists of the Saudi story would be the most important for me right now.
All right. And we are also joined tonight by Hans Olaf Henkel. He's a German MEP with the European Conservatives and Reformist Group. Which of these stories do you like?
Thank you for the invitation.
Yes, so which of these top stories do you like tonight?
Well, I'm really shocked by this disappearance of the Saudi Arabian and Turkey. And for me, this is sort of typical, apparently, because more and more people seem to be disappearing because some governments don't like them.
A lot of discussion surrounding that topic. But first, we will start with our top story. We'll go to Germany, because as voters in Bavaria head to the polls this weekend, they could be choosing much more than who will lead Germany's second most populous state. The direction of the country is on the line, and perhaps the political fate of German Chancellor Angela Merkel. Bavarian Premier Markus Söder is vigorously campaigning for the ruling Christian Social Union. In 12 out of the last 13 elections, the CSU has won 12 absolute majorities. But that could all change this weekend. According to several polls, the coalition partner of Angela Merkel's Christian Democratic Union has seen a huge drop in support. And poised to pick up those votes are the far-right anti-immigrant AfD and pro-European Greens. All right, first let's take a look at this situation. I will go to you, Hans. How big of a shake-up is this?
Oh, I think it's significant because the CSU, as you already said in your moderation, will not be able to command anymore by itself the government. It will have to look for coalition partners. And they can only be free voters or maybe even the Greens. It's possible, even theoretically, a grand coalition. But behind it is really another defeat for Chancellor Merkel, because it's not the first regional election where her party or her partner is suffering a major defeat.
It is not the first. So is it something shocking, Valentina? I would put that to you.
I think it's telling of a trend that has been going on for a few years now, because we've seen it last year with the Dutch elections, for instance, where the same phenomenon happened of the centrist parties, center-right and center-left, being squeezed by the extremes, by the far right, but also by the leftist Greens, as we see now in Bavaria. So I think it's also a litmus test a little bit of what will happen next year in the European elections for the European Parliament.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I'd like to bring up some graphics here, because let's take a look at just how much political opinions have changed in Bavaria. It's very interesting. In the 2013 state election, the CSU won 47.7% of the vote and took 101 out of 180 seats in the state parliament. A recent poll suggests that the party could see a big drop. It is currently polling at 33%. And that same poll has the Green Party polling at a record 18%, and the Alternative for Germany party is polling at 10% for its first appearance in Bavarian state elections. All right, Darren, what is driving this?
Well, this is the really interesting point, isn't it? In some regards, it is a replica of what we're seeing elsewhere in Europe, where we're seeing centrist parties losing votes to the fracture of politics and other political parties. But, you know, it is not a coincidence that between 2013 and 2018, there was a massive crisis involving migration in 2015 that I think is still clearly playing with German voters. And also the recent squabbling within Angela Merkel's grand coalition government, not least of all with Mr. Seehofer, I think is also hurting the CSU in Bavaria. Now, earlier I spoke to Manfred Weber. He is, of course, a very prominent politician from Bavaria. He is, I think, currently on his way there to campaign in the final few days. And I think we've got an interview with him. And I started off by asking him precisely...
Yeah, we will indeed, because you had spoken to him earlier today, right? All right, but first let's get the view, because you did mention something really interesting about the 2015 the migration decision of Angela Merkel. All right, because this I think really has become one of the sticking points. And let's get the view on the ground. Let's cross over to Bavaria. I'm joined by Markus Feldenkirchen, a reporter with the Germany's Der Spiegel magazine. All right, please give us the view from the ground there. I mean, what Angela Merkel took a gamble in 2015. Is she going to pay for this right now?
Is, I mean, even the possibility that the party could drop down to 33%, as you mentioned, would have been considered a miracle only a year ago. What is the reason for the decline? First of all, the CSU is in a way a victim of their own success. They modernized Bavaria extremely. They fostered economic growth, and the country became more and more attractive to citizens from all over Germany who moved there. And by that, somehow transformed the mindset of the Bavarian population, making Bavaria less traditional country than it was for all the past decades. And secondly, you're right, the party lost an enormous amount of trust due to its confusing policies when it comes to migration. They criticized Chancellor Angela Merkel harshly for her more liberal stand on refugees, calling for rejection of further refugees and a much stricter border control. And by that, they raised expectations and failed to fulfill their promises, because in the end, they always lost to Angela Merkel.
All right. You know, when you've been talking to a lot of the voters, I mean, are they going to the left or to the Greens or to the AfD based on ideology, or we just don't want to stick to the mainstream anymore? What is driving them to go either way?
Well, first of all, they lost trust in the capability of the CSU to solve the problems, and they are driven by ideology. You're right. The former voters who are not happy about their policies on refugees, they turn to the AfD, and on the other side, many Christian voters flip over to the Green Party recently.
All right. Thank you very much for bringing us that view from Bavaria. Markus Feldenkirchen, a reporter with Germany's Der Spiegel magazine. Thank you very much. All right, Hans, I'd like to ask you, is this setting the tone for a political path, a different political path for Germany?
Well, I have to object to something what he just said, that this is sort of a typical Bavarian situation. We have another election later this month in Hesse, which is another major German state, and the prediction is exactly the same. They are going to lose 10 percentage points at least, the CSU, and the AfD gets even more support in Hesse than in Bavaria. And look, I myself was one of the people who started together with the AfD. I left the party because of its right-wing movement, because of its racist tones, because of its pro-Putin attitude, the attitude against free market enterprise and so on. And when we left the party in August 2015, there was not a single newspaper, including the Spiegel, which didn't say the party is gone, it's finished, it's over. And in the polls, they were way below the 5% threshold. And then came the September 5, Mrs. Merkel opening the border. And that saved this party. It resurrected the party. So let's not forget, this is the overriding issue, not only in Germany, but everywhere in Europe. And we will perhaps later talk about Brexit. The last discussions in Britain were also only about immigration.
Very interesting. And we were trying to get a lot more German voices actually here. And that's, Darren, you were trying to do that today as you were
Yeah, indeed. And as I said, we are going to now hear, I think, from Manfred Weber. I did put him to the CSU in some regards should be rewarded for what they've done. There is hardly any unemployment. The economy is doing remarkably well. Crime is low. This in normal circumstances, even though they've been around and in control for years, the CSU should be rewarded. And so I was trying to put to him, what does he think? What are the reasons? Why are the polls so bad? Let's have a listen to Manfred Weber.
So all over Europe, the migration question is a dominating issue in the campaign. And we are at the moment suffering as CSU from this debate. I think what we have to do is to give people an idea that we have a solution. We can solve the problem. And that means, first of all, that Europe must deliver. On the European Council meeting next week, I expect really results on these questions, because otherwise we will feed the populists if we cannot give a proper answer.
In saying that, there's obviously been internal bickering, though, as well, with Mr. Seehofer and Ms. Merkel. I mean, how much, again, do you think that's had to play? People don't like to see parties fighting with one another.
Well, as CSU, we have a common idea how to solve problems, and we have a common base for this. And I respect very much what Horst Seehofer is doing in German level, on the national level, to guarantee that the rules and the legislation is properly implemented in the daily life, because that was a problem in 2015, that people had the feeling that this is not anymore under control, the migration flows and so on. So to win back the control of the state in all these questions is an important job for us. And on the other hand, also said the Prime Minister in Bavaria is doing a job to implement again the legislation. So we are coming back in a way to a trustful procedure also in the migration fields, but that takes time.
None of the polls are showing that the CSU is likely to get above 40%. They're normally right. I mean, will Mr. Seehofer have to resign if he doesn't get 40%, if you don't get 40%?
We are in campaign. In campaign, we are fighting with the other political parties. We are showing people the alternatives, and then people will decide. And then the CSU must analyze and must discuss the future afterwards. But for the moment, there is no party internal discussion needed. We have to convince people.
You wouldn't stand for that position, though, if he was to resign?
Horst Seehofer is elected till 2019, and we are a team. We want to work together and want to convince people.
That wasn't a no.
We are working together again. That is a position. Again, there is no discussion about the party leader at the moment going on, because he is elected for another year, and we want to be, as a team, convincing towards the people. That is what we want to do.
Our panelists reacting here to Manfred Weber.
Well, a pretty strong reaction from you.
I tell you, there was a clear contradiction. I mean, the guy said on one hand, we need a European solution to the immigration crisis.
And how great Mr.
Then shortly after that,
doing.
the state must have control of who comes into the country.
He's between a rock and a hard place. I mean, on the one hand, he's a Merkelite, he's an ally of Chancellor Merkel. On the other hand, he is a CSU party member, and Horst Seehofer is his party boss. And Mr. Seehofer clashed with Ms. Merkel precisely over migration, even threatened to undo the entire coalition earlier this year. So it's kind of understandable why he was waffling like that. But I don't think for voters this comes across as a very strong political message inspires
a lot of politicians waffling. We have to remember he wants to become EPP candidate for the Commission president.
Absolutely.
He needs Angela Merkel's support.
Exactly.
Which really is a joke. I mean,
but, well, as we were...
Not a fan.
Exactly, clearly not a fan. But as you were saying, Darren, that Manfred Weber, you just saw there, he wants to become Commission President. And today that race has a new entrant. Frans Timmermans confirmed that he's running to be the candidate for the Alliance of Socialists and Democrats. Shedding his usual suit and tie, the Dutch politician returned to his hometown in the Netherlands and his favorite watering hole and explained his priorities.
Ja, als voorzitter kun je de zaak nog meer naar je hand zetten. Ik denk dat Europa echt behoefte heeft aan een sociale impuls. Ik denk dat Europa echt behoefte heeft aan duurzame oplossingen om de economie duurzaam in te richten. Om ervoor te zorgen dat het klimaatakkoord ook een succes wordt. Om ervoor te zorgen dat de rechtsstaat overal overeind blijft. Ik heb daar plannen voor. En daar zul je altijd meerderheden in moeten vinden in het Europees Parlement en met de lidstaten. Ik heb het idee dat ik mensen bij elkaar kan brengen en samen kan binden. En dat wil ik graag doen.
All right, back to the panel, and joining us for this part of the panel is Sam Morgan, a reporter for Euractiv. Sam, so I'll start with you here. Frans Timmermans, a lot of people were saying that he's made a lot of enemies, rubbed people the wrong way, but do you think he has a chance at this?
I think he's made a lot of enemies, but he's also made a lot of friends, because he's been this paladin of rule of law and, Juncker's right-hand man on these kind of things, and he's a shrewd bloke. He attached his name to all this anti-plastic pollution drive as well.
Issues, maybe, yeah.
And I think he's won a lot of friends. But yes, he has made enemies along the way. Romania, Poland, Hungary. Whether those balance out at the end of the day, we'll see.
And Hans, you were not a fan of Weber. Are you a fan of Timmermans?
Well,
I have been all my life in business, and I know how difficult it is to run such a big organization like the European Commission. And Herr Weber has no real executive experience. Now, Mr. Timmermans has. I mean, he had a lot of experience, not only as the senior vice president of the Commission, but previous in his country, he had executive experience. On the other hand, I must say the socialists really have no chance in the next European election to have any say on who is really becoming the president of the Commission. Everywhere in Europe, the socialists are on the way back. By the way, very much so as the Christian Democrats in Germany. They are suffering from the same thing.
All right. Well, we will be watching because a lot more candidates will be throwing their name into that hat. But let's turn now to a completely different kind of political story. It's a very Belgian solution to a problem that has plagued European cities for centuries. Check it out.
It's a blight that plagues many major cities, public urination. But the university city of Ghent has found a unique way to stop its boozed-up students taking the piss. A 2-month campaign has just been launched, with revelers who avail themselves of public toilets rewarded with traditional Belgian frites. Those who can't hold it in go hungry and also risk a hefty €60 fine. Across the border in France, Paris is facing up to its own pee problem. The mayor there saw backlash after installing bright red public urinals in tourist hotspots across the city. Well, back in Ghent, with public urination mostly perpetrated by men, authorities hope to turn everyone into gentlemen.
This is a bit of a strange story. You get rewarded for doing what you're supposed to do.
This is the most serious story we have covered on this programme, because I do not like the fact, and you find it now in almost every European city, there are no public toilets. It's really bad. There are no public toilets. Councils and local authorities across Europe have decided clearly to close these things down because they're expensive to run. And what is the alternative? You have to either go into a cafe where, unless you buy something, they turn you away, or you have to pay.
Yeah.
And I know the phrase "to spend a penny." It's often much more than a penny, I can tell you. Bring back public toilets.
It is a political issue.
I think the reward is excellent because although they call them French fries, the Belgian fries are the best in the world. So I think this is a fantastic.
Everyone's a winner.
Indeed, but going back to the public toilet issue, it is becoming political because it is, as you were saying, it's a basic right almost to have public toilets, and now you've got politicians getting into trouble for this. It's a real.
People want nicer cities, don't they? Air pollution and things like that. People are more interested in having a nice space to walk around. It's a great toilet training mechanism, though. Fries, brilliant. I hope they bring that to Brussels as well.
I just think it is one of these things where you kind of do feel it is a right that if you're caught short, you're out and about in the middle of a city, it should be a basic function of that city to provide you with some services.
I mean, it's just basic.
No?
It's a basic thing to not do it in public. Anyway, we have a lot to talk about on raw politics, new threats for Theresa May, and a siblings spat for Boris Johnson. We round up the latest Brexit drama, plus piling on the political pressure. The US President Trump and other leaders demand answers about Saudi Arabia's alleged role in the disappearance of a Washington Post journalist. Don't go away. Welcome back to Raw Politics. Now, pressure is piling on Saudi Arabia to provide answers about the disappearance of reporter and Saudi dissident Jamal Khashoggi. Images released by Turkish authorities show an alleged 15-man Saudi hit team arriving in Istanbul on 2 private planes on the day Khashoggi was last seen entering the Saudi consulate there. Now, Khashoggi is a Washington Post reporter and an outspoken critic of the Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. Trump's son-in-law, Jared Kushner, National Security Advisor John Bolton, and Secretary of State Mike Pompeo have spoken to the Crown Prince about Khashoggi. Saudi leaders deny all involvement in the journalist's disappearance. All right, at the noon briefing today, Commission officials would not say if they would impose sanctions if Saudi authorities are proven to be behind the disappearance, and they refuse to give details on the nature of the communications with the Saudi kingdom. Euronews reporter Shona Murray was there.
You said that you're monitoring the situation, but has the Commission actually been in touch with the Saudi authorities demanding an investigation from the Commission, or what kind of interaction has there been?
As I said, there are many contacts that are ongoing, including with Saudi authorities, and we have passed this message very clearly, not just publicly, but also in direct contact.
All right, well, with me in the studio with more on this, we have our political editor, Darren McCaffrey, Valentina Pop from the Wall Street Journal, and Mohammed Shaban, a reporter from the Euronews Arabic service. Mohammed, I'll start with you. You've been covering the region and this story quite closely. I'd like to talk about how brazen this whole act is. I mean, are you surprised by just how openly this was done?
Well, it's really surprising regarding the facts that we have only one fact since the beginning, that we have a citizen, I would like to call him a citizen, entered his consulate for some procedures. He didn't get out. So since the beginning, we have the only fact.
Right, Saudi Arabia obviously denies involvement, but the fact that this happened in broad daylight, what does this say? The fact that it's so brazen.
Well, I believe we are all stuck in the potentials on what happened, what may happen to this journalist, to this citizen, since the very beginning. And so far, there are some leaks here and there. We hear some resources, like any other big event. But so far, we have this only fact. We are talking about, let's put it like this. We have the 2 parts here in this issue. We have the Saudi Arabia, we have the Turkey, who are not they are not along together since a while. They are not, there's no kind of accord between both of them since a while. And it seems like everybody met now. They have transferred it. They have changed it into a political issue.
What's also interesting, when you look at Saudi Arabia, you have the Crown Prince who's trying to present a different face, right? And then you see something like this happening.
But we are dealing with facts, right?
Yeah, sure.
I mean, the fact is that the man didn't come out of the consulate anymore. That's so somewhere he has disappeared. And also our paper has corroborated some of the claims that the Turkish authorities have made about all these flights from Saudi Arabia coming to Turkey with alleged hitmen. We don't know if the men were actual hitmen, but we could corroborate the actual flights that did land in Turkey, as the Turkish authorities said. Now, from there to say, they killed the man and dismembered him, I mean, that's an allegation that nobody can really substantiate and prove. And also, we must remind ourselves that Turkey itself is not exactly a journalist freedom paragon, as it has 250 journalists in jail at the moment.
I think what's interesting here is the change in tone in the way that political leaders were reacting, because they've been lining up now to seek answers from Saudi authorities. At first, the U.S. response was cautious, but yesterday that tone changed slightly.
This is a bad situation. We cannot let this happen. To reporters, to anybody, we can't let this happen. And we're going to get to the bottom of it, okay?
Well, it's despicable, and the whole world is watching. The Crown Prince is portraying himself as a reformer who's trying to improve and open up Saudi society. Reformers don't kill their political opponents.
My feelings are that probably he's been murdered.
All right, are we seeing cracks, Darren, in the US-Saudi relationship?
I think we are to a degree, but it is interesting that Donald Trump went on to say that whether there should be sanctions. He said, I think that would be hurting us. We have jobs. We have a lot of things happening in this country. We have a country that's probably doing economically better than ever before. In essence, Trump still views this as Saudi Arabia have given us lots of defence deals. We're getting money from that. That's protecting American jobs. That's my primary mission, not necessarily to properly scrutinise what Saudi Arabia are doing. He has clearly come under some domestic pressure. And we've also heard European leaders like the British Foreign Secretary Jeremy Hunt has talked about how he's worried about these allegations. Again, a very strong ally of Saudi Arabia. But in essence, many people are pointing out, you look at Russia with the Schiphol case in Salisbury, you look what China have done with the head of Interpol, and potentially Saudi Arabia with this case in Istanbul. And people are starting to say, essentially, our authoritarian regimes now pretty brazen because the international community have been unable to properly deal with these incidents. And everyone seems to be walking
on eggshells around them. I think are they well aware of this reaction that people are walking on eggshells around them because of economic ties or...
Exactly. We're talking about the number 2 importer of arms in the world, it's Saudi Arabia. So we are talking about benefits here. And at the same time, we are talking about the differences between Saudi Arabia and Turkey. Every part wants to put a goal. Let's put it like this, really. And why, for example, why the Turkish authorities, for example, are leaking step by step? It's like a kind of pressure, undirected pressure. Okay, the first day we saw a still photo, showing that Mr. Khashoggi about to enter the consulate, the building. The second day we are talking about videos. We are talking about allegedly 15 persons.
You've got to ask about motivation as well. Why
exactly.
Yeah.
So it became like
to be fair, Erdogan is also demanding answers.
He's in a tough position as well.
It has happened in his country.
Exactly.
I think it's understandable.
Yeah.
Absolutely. All right. Well, Turkey, as we were talking about, has been releasing what it says is evidence of a Saudi plot. And on social media, citizen journalists have been working to confirm or disprove that information. And with more on that side of the story, I'm joined by Alex Morgan and our team in Lyon, The Cube, our social media news desk. Alex.
Hey, Tessa. Yeah, just listening to your discussion there, all this information people are sifting through, and it's feeding into what is called open source intelligence. Now, that's a graphic to represent something that's not a new idea by any means. This is perhaps the best I could come up with here. The idea is that information that's publicly available is brought together and analysed. Open source intelligence. Now, that's different from classified intelligence. Traditionally, this was the preserve of intelligence officers and governments who would look through information like transport timetables, news reports, photographs, and other information in the public domain for insight into a story, a mystery, a case, a crime, that kind of thing. Well, of course, in 2018, in today's modern era, the era of the internet, no longer is this the preserve only of intelligence officers, but all of us, individual people, able to use the internet, smartphones, social media to find, sift, analyse, share and discuss information separate from the narratives and indeed the information given out by governments. It's citizen journalists, ordinary people, putting themselves at the heart of this investigation. Now, I think perhaps the best example of the crossover between professional journalists and citizen journalists is the work of Bellingcat. You remember they've done a lot in uncovering, as they say, the identities of the Skripal attempted assassins there, but also they rose to prominence after the downing of MH17 by what they claim is a book missile launcher. They did a detailed investigation. Well, they are focusing on this now. Now, saying Turkish officials have pledged that they'll be giving more evidence, so the open call from Bellingcat's chief researcher here saying, well, what can the hashtag here, OSINT, the open source intelligence community, what can you come up with? And then people didn't disappoint, sharing a lot of information with them. I just want to perhaps show you some of the work they're doing. For example, this. So this is an image that was being shared on WhatsApp. It's later been released by media in Turkey, and they used Google Maps, that is open source, public information, to identify this as the street outside the consulate, identifying key features here and comparing them with the images released there. So this is the kind of example of information that is in the public domain that ordinary people can pick up on and share that helps to give us an idea of what is really going on. Indeed, there's further discussion on these long threads on both Twitter and other social networks about exactly what could have happened to Khashoggi. But this is an example of how ordinary people are taking it into their own hands, dissecting, discussing, analysing, and that is separate from the official lines we're getting, or in some cases not getting, from national governments, Tessa.
All right, thank you for that, Alex and the Cube team. Valentina, you were talking about, this is Turkey. It's not exactly the beacon of journalistic freedom and free flow of information. Do you find, as a journalist, you're also having to rely a lot on what's out there from citizen journalism, especially on stories like this one?
I think they are doing a tremendous job, particularly the team at Bellingcat, I think, has proven to have gotten to the bottom of disinformation and propaganda coming from Russian trolls and so on, but also in identifying real identities or in triangulating the data on a picture to say this is a fake picture or this is a real picture. But all these answers that we can get on corroborating details about his disappearance still doesn't answer the big question of what has happened to Mr. Khashoggi. So
yeah, all it proves in some regards is that he has disappeared.
No,
absolutely.
This is the only fact we have. This is the only fact we have so far. And let's say, what about the Turkish photos, for example? Where are the Turkish videos, for example? Why we can't see it? Why they have leaked just partially? Some of them like arriving to the airport. This is are all far, and there's this kind of details that let us sink more and more in more details.
More questions to ask.
Yeah.
Exactly. But where are the photos? What about saying like the Saudi Arabia authorities saying, okay, our CCTV didn't register that moment, or they don't register.
But then also, why have Saudi Arabia not agreed to let the Turkish authorities into the consulates so someone can do an investigation? I don't know. We're going to have to see where this goes.
I think the story is far from over, and we're going to be watching it really very closely. All right, a lot more coming up on World Politics. Poland defiance. Despite EU objections, the president appoints 27 new Supreme Court judges. And Frankfurt wants you to fall in love with Frankfurt, the new campaign fighting stereotypes and courting post-Brexit business. They'll go in. Welcome back to World Politics. Now, Poland is once again flexing its political muscles despite EU objections. President Andrzej Duda has appointed 27 new judges to its Supreme Court, and that's in addition to 10 who were already nominated last month. A car carrying the latest appointee was met with chants of traitor as it left the presidential palace yesterday. It's the latest in a series of demonstrations as people push back against recent judicial reforms. The changes forced a third of the country's judges into early retirement and gave the ruling party more control over the legal system. The move angered the EU, which accuses the government of breaching the rule of law. All right, joining me for this panel is Euronews political editor Darren McCaffrey. He's still with us. Sam Morgan, a reporter from Euractiv.com, and British MEP David Coburn from the Europe of Freedom Direct Democracy Group. All right, this... we were talking earlier about brazen behaviors of governments and of countries. I'll ask you, Sam. Poland is being brazen here. Why?
I think it gets back to this whole sovereignty thing again and the naughty kid syndrome. If any recommendation from Brussels gets handed down, it's seen as like a diktat, even though it's just the rule of law being imposed.
So it's not afraid that it's going to get sanctioned or get into trouble?
No, I think it was quite almost telling today we had the European Court of Justice appoint their new first Advocate General, Chief Judge, and it's a Polish guy. And there's nothing political about that. He's just the best guy for the job. It's a nice little symbolism. But Poland is not sticking to the rules of the club.
Yeah, David. All right. Darren,
no, I was just going to say they are doing this, though, because there is going to be a court decision from the ECJ on whether Poland is acting constitutionally. And clearly the Commission doesn't think it is. And they're trying to get these judges in place before that. But the problem is, what is the sanction for Poland?
Exactly.
It's Article 7. But ultimately, we all know that Hungary will, when it gets to it, will veto that option. So what is the stick with which the European Union can actually really hit Poland with, or indeed anyone that it feels falls out of line?
Yeah, go ahead, David. What do you think?
Well, I think it's nothing to do with it. I think the European Union is a trading bloc. It's nothing more and nothing less. It's not a country. It has no right to tell...
But if you join this bloc, you've got to abide by rules.
Just let me finish. As far as I'm concerned, Poland is a sovereign nation. The Polish government are elected by the Polish people. The Polish people make the decisions. The Polish government decide to replace those old judges with new ones who are not communists or whatever they were before. That's their right to do that. It's nothing to do with the European Union. The European Union is only to do with trade and should stick to that. And that's why Britain's leaving. That's why Britain's leaving. Because we do not want to be part of a country.
The European Union is clearly not just a trading bloc.
Yes, it is.
Well, it's not, because that's the reason you're leaving.
When we joined it was a trading bloc, and we were lied to, and it is wrong, and that's why we're leaving. And the Poles will follow us.
The reason that you campaign to leave is because you think that Europe is no longer just a trading bloc. It is clearly not just a trading bloc.
Well, then you should have a vote on it. People didn't get a vote on it. People were told it was a trading bloc. That it was undemocratic. We were told it was a trading bloc. It was nothing of the sort. It was a country. And now we have left. The British people decided they don't want any part of a country called Europe, and neither, it seems, do the Poles, and neither do the Czechs, and various other countries throughout Europe.
When Poland joined the European Union, it definitely wasn't a trading bloc.
Yes, precisely. And Poland have
changed their minds.
Whatever you think, Poland have signed up. To be members of the European Union.
They can sign out.
But when you're a member of the club, you do have to adhere to the rules.
And they can sign out and join us in Brexit.
We will be going to a topic that's closer to your heart, David. All right, now, as the clock continues to count down to the Brexit deadline, things are getting serious for Theresa May. Let's get the latest developments now in today's Brexit Brief.
Just when you thought there was light at the end of the Brexit tunnel for Theresa May, reports suggest the Democratic Unionist Party, which props up the UK government, could vote against the upcoming budget if they don't like May's Brexit deal. With the passing of a budget traditionally seen as a vote of confidence in the government, a defeat has the potential to topple Theresa May. And it's not just the DUP piling pressure on number 10. Boris Johnson, the high-profile Brexiteer and former Foreign Secretary, launched a Twitter tirade last night. He warned that Theresa May's negotiation strategy would turn the UK into a permanent EU colony. But his claim that the Brexit vote was the biggest majority in the UK's history was questioned by the pro-EU journalist and sister of the Brexiteer, Rachel Johnson. Back in Brussels, and Brexit negotiator Michel Barnier held up his paperwork to show that up to 85% of a withdrawal agreement has already been agreed. The Irish border remains a key sticking point, though. Expect that to dominate negotiations when EU leaders gather for a Brexit showdown in Brussels next week.
All right, Sam, I'll let you get a word in on this one, on Brexit Hell Week. Your prediction on that 15% doable?
No, gut feeling. There's a lot of gut feelings. I mean, that's the only thing we have these days, I think, apart from Barnier's charts and documents and things, which I find really helpful. It's going to be a deal, but the DUP are going to... They're going to be the Bavaria of the UK. They're going to hold...
You were talking about...
Yeah, I think, for the DUP, this is actually quite a risky strategy, I would say, for them. Ultimately, they are the largest party in Northern Ireland, and they have got the balance of power at Westminster because they've got 10 MPs there. But, I mean, how much do they reflect the view of the people who elected them, indeed the people of Northern Ireland? It voted to remain inside the European Union. But
they voted Great Britain.
And 70%...
Not as Northern Ireland.
70% of... They don't represent 70% of the people there. So it's a bit of a risky strategy because many people would say that Brexit actually puts in peril the Union. And given the fact that they are primarily a unionist party, that's quite tricky. But yeah, the question is there going to be a deal next week? I mean, we really don't know. No one knows. Even aside from Michel Barnier's colour-coded charts that he loves holding up.
David, if Theresa May blinks and gives in...
Number one, Michel Barnier has made a mess of this, and so has Mrs. May. Under 1952 Protocol of the European Convention on Human Rights, the free expression of the opinion of the people in the choice of legislators is important. Now, that means that no matter what, Northern Ireland does not have a say after we leave, after we have Brexit, in who runs the rules on the customs. So, as far as they're concerned, this would be a breach of the European Court of Human Rights. if the DUP were to accept it and if Mr. Barnier was to insist on it. So it's absolute nonsense. They can't push it through. End of story. It would be against the European Court of Human Rights. So the European Union will be breaking its own rules and regulations. So absolutely not. We're going to go for a Brexit without
So you think there's going to be no deal?
I think there'll be no deal, and I hope there'll be no deal, because we'll then put a gun to the European Union's head. The French are already panicking about business. The Spanish are getting hysterical, because what are they going to do when they have the British there?
No deal.
And as are the Germans.
Let's move on now.
I do love it when Brexiteers cite European legislation and rules to prove their point.
Well, why not?
All right.
You beat us with your rules. We're beating you with your rules.
We've got to move on now. It's a lot of more Brexit talk coming our way next week and this week. Now, London's financial firms face up to Brexit. A campaign has been launched by Frankfurt's main finance. It aims to tackle prejudices about the city and encourage businesses to take a fresh look at Frankfurt. That's today's Raw Moment.
Hi, were your parents architects? Because you sure are well built.
Nice line. Can I offer you a drink?
Sure. Thanks. I'm Natalie.
Nice to meet you. The name is Furt. Frankfurt.
Frankfurt? Oh, I've heard of you, but...
Oh no, not again. Let's hear those prejudices.
Where to start? Not open-minded, no culture, boring, terrible food.
That hurt. Check this out. Modern architecture, high-end shopping streets, bustling farmers markets, beautiful landscapes. Perfect for weekend trips. And here, museums, theaters, exciting events, vibrant nightlife.
I'm sold.
Good, because I think this is the beginning of a great relationship.
Cheers to us.
Prost.
Okay, very quickly. Are you sold? Are you sold?
It's so unbelievably bad that it's almost good. And I love the way they're trying to present themselves as kind of not terribly German in the most German of ways. It said that there is a serious case behind this. Jobs will leave London to a varying degree. Frankfurt is touting for business. I'm not sure that video will be the decisive reason why they will leave that.
But indeed, a lot of businesses...
In London, they can't get staff to leave London to go to Frankfurt. It's one of the most boring cities in the world. And as for the architecture, it was redesigned by the RAF in 1945. So I don't know why they're going for that. This is the last thing they should discuss. And quite frankly, no one is going to leave London to go to Frankfurt. London is the centre of the world economy.
Well, we're going to see.
They will need to try hard.
Thank you to all our guests, and thank you for watching us on Raw Politics. We'll see you again soon.